All right, so let's talk about Krita's soft round brush. Now, someone pointed this out in one of my videos, and they said that it's two main reasons they don't like Krita, and it's because of performance issues, but also the soft round brush doesn't get soft enough. And they're right, it doesn't get soft enough. So mostly default settings here, I've modified it slightly. You can see it looks relatively soft, but when you're trying to do blends with it, it's pretty rough, right? Like it starts to have some kind of like accumulation looking stuff going on. Now, if you worked in other software, like say Photoshop, for example, and you were to use a soft round brush over here, it's very predictable as far as like the softness to it, right? Matter of fact, let's turn this like so. You can see very predictable. It does get a little bit of a banding effect into it, but you know, you can drop that flow down, and this is where it really shines, is that now it blends like no other. Okay. And so it works really well. In Affinity Photo, it does something very similar to this for the most part. Sometimes gets that little accumulation look that Krita will get. So this artist, they're saying that, you know, they prefer working in Clip Studio because of these reasons, like this one and the performance issues it has with like transforms and using photos and all that fun stuff. So it does have some performance issues, no doubt, but it's still an excellent little sketching program. So if you're stuck here in Krita and you want to figure out how to make this soft round brush work better or how to blend these things better, we're going to go over that real quick. Basically, first thing you could try doing is imagine like you're working with a hard round brush, right? And so your hard round brush, and you're going to do some shading with it, pure opacity even. You can imagine like you got your gray, specific color selector, and if you just bump it up by one, you can see it's going to go up and up and up like so, right? That's how you would shade with a hard round brush. Maybe not to those extremes, but you'd start shading this way. All right. So here's the trick. You have to do this kind of like you're working traditionally. If you're painting with paint or maybe doing like sidewalk chalk, you might use your finger to smudge it. We have the Blender Blur brush, which is a smudger technically. And a lot of people don't like this one because it smudges too much, right? And that's not what they're going for. They don't like the smudge of it. It's also not very smooth. So, but you can smudge it. Pin pressure sensitivity, if you're using a graphics tablet, you can use it very light, but it still smudges quite a bit. Here's the trick with this one. Drop your opacity. This is the best bet you're going to have, okay? And you can go through and do this number. And just use very light pressure with your pen. You'll get a perfect gradient almost always. It might still have some stepping effects in it. That's just because of 8-bit nature. 8-bit images, they don't have as many steps as like a 16-bit image, right? So with that out of the way, the soft round brush, you can still utilize this thing very effectively and efficiently. There are some other tweaks you can try to use to help limit some of the problems you might face. You can see like your opacity, maybe try linear or that curve, whatever you want. The brush tip itself, you can try messing with the softness curve here to get it even softer. You can also try turning density down. Density adds noise, and that noise is going to be dependent on the size, right? So it's going to get noisier, but you'll see that it doesn't actually get rid of that effect entirely, right? But it does reduce it, right? So that's something you could think about utilizing in this process. Now, so we're going to go back to the kind of the defaults here. The next big one is actually how you blend, right? So if you have like a darker color over here and something like that, we have like lighter gray over here. Let's go to a mid gray in the middle. All right. So you can color sample between and do steps between as well. Sometimes this works out really well. You can kind of blend them back together, but you'll see I still get this little banding effect. This is where you combo all of this stuff together, basically. You're going to maybe do something like that and then still use the smudger at the end of the day to go back and hit it all and blend it back together, right? This is going to cause a lot of people a lot of trouble because it's size dependent. It means you have to do large things first and then smaller things when you're doing this. Now, it's not as hard as you think, but there's a clever little trick to it, okay? And that's how you actually work with your layers. So when you are you're going to be creating any kind of shape, right? And you're just wanting to shade this thing. And like you got multiple shapes for most of your artworks. You use this as a mask, basically, right? The shape itself. And so you can right click group. You can do quick clipping groups, or you can just group it and set up a clipping group manually. So if I hit Control G, we'll do it manually real quick. If we hit Control Shift G, it just adds a layer and alpha locks it. Control G, add a layer, alpha lock it. That's what it does. All right. We can paint on this one right here, and we can use the airbrush for it. We can now extend it as big as we want. And we can add in gray. We can add a light gray. And you can see we can do something like this. And we can go back and we can kind of shade this real quick, like not too many problems anyways. It does have a little bit of that kind of banding effect still going on. Use the blur tool. And the reason this works is if we turn this off, we're actually doing the whole layer like so. So we can actually blur right through here. And we'll get this super nice soft gradient now, which is awesome. We could, if we wanted to try doing it this way, we can do just a regular layer, put it outside that group. We could also try doing something like this. We'll make a shape. We'll make it bigger. All right. And we can just pixel lock it right there. Now, transparency lock or whatever they call it. We can shade all this like this as well. Now, sometimes you do run into an issue with this. So be warned of that. In the sense that you might want to still blur it, right? So if you want to blur it, it might pull in transparency on the edge or just a different tone. Sometimes that can happen a little bit, but generally it's not that bad with this. So this kind of simplifies your setup here, because now if you do a group and you do a new layer on top of it, and we can imagine we do the big shading on just the base instead of using a silhouette. But this gets a little tricky because if you have to change your silhouette, now it's harder to work with. But now we can do, I have a soft round brush that's set up. I'll go over the settings real quick. It's just slightly different than the default soft round airbrush. Basically, I've turned the precision up, pressure sensitive size. I think I turned flow on as well. Yeah. Okay, so flow goes on. But we can do this one now. We can make additional refinements here, perhaps. Like this. And let me turn some brush smoothing on. I'm using Laziness Zoom here for brush smoothing. But yeah, it's a third-party program, and I'm going to miss that edge every time. Anyways, you can do things like this, potentially. Probably be better if I zoomed in a little. Get more accuracy going. Right? And I still somehow missed it completely at the end. It's awesome. And we'll try that one more time. All right, so now we could do like opacity, set it lower, or overlay, whatever we want here, and we can alpha lock it. Boom. So we can do our details on new layers basically if we needed to. So if we ever mess up the big shading, we can go back and fix it. Easy enough, right? Okay, so we got through all of this. Let's go to here. Let's create a layer. Here's the trick. When we set all this up, or when we do the airbrush anyways, a lot of times if you're using it full opacity, that's fine. You can set this much lower, right? The only downside to this is that when you use it lower, you have to do possibly multiple strokes, but you can blend much more efficiently or effectively, predictably with this by doing it like this. So, but it's going to require a little bit more brush work. So it becomes a little bit slower, but you can do that as well. So you can see the difference now, right? And so this will work out for you as well, possibly. This is what I personally do most of the time. And then if I ever find the gradients just aren't quite where I want them, I'll just smudge them a little bit with a lower opacity as well. And so that works. I mean, that's probably the best way of utilizing it. All right. Now it gets a little bit trickier. So another thing you want to think about doing is when you work this way, because you're probably working a complex image. It's not as simple as this, right? You might have things going in front of one another. This group here, let's put it on top maybe. Let's see if we can just make this like merge together somehow, right? Okay, yeah. So we'll put this one in front actually. If you want to add transparency mask, you can. You can add a transparency mask here, right? You can think of this as just like how you create transparency for the whole of the object. But you can use black and white, right? And you'll notice as we use black here, we'll use the airbrush again. And we'll have to do a lot of extra brush work at that setting. So let's go a little bit more so than that. We can start to blend these with transparency basically as well. But you have to be careful because they're a little bit harder to work on the edges. So use your lasso tool, your freehand selection tool down here. And sometimes you got to mask things out. You know, don't be afraid of using this as needed when needed in certain areas. So that way you can do more proper kind of setups here potentially. Oh, Control Shift I this one. All right, so that inverts the selection. There we go. And you can see it went right up into that area. Not even a big deal because we can press X. We can use white. We can go back and we can add that in there and just kind of work this very cleverly together. Unfortunately, it's kind of what you have to deal with though when working this way, right? And usually I don't stress this step too much. I'll often leave little errors like this to the very end and either do a straight paint over on that area where I might go in with an airbrush, color sample, and just kind of touch up this area a bit. Something like that. And not even think about it after that point, right? Like it's just, that's what it's going to be now, basically. And so you can always do as your final touch, finish your blends out. Try to get them going on a new layer. Be a little bit more challenging than you probably think. So, you know, be careful with this step. It can also be useful to blur these quite extensively in some areas. All right. You can also do that on your transparency mask as well. You want to just blend certain areas out a little bit. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. In my case, it's not working. So I'm not sure what's going on there. Yeah, we can just work that back out a little there. Try to blur it again a little. Okay. And yep, there you have it. So yeah, it's a little tricky, right? It's a little bit cumbersome and Krita to kind of get those effects going the way you expect them to. You know, it's just really a little bit of finesse to it. But ultimately, it's completely worth the time and the effort to do that. And if you just really think about how you're going to create your shapes, your layers, and put everything together, it works out even better, right? Hey, once you've done this, you can press Control G, put all that into a group, you see? So you could actually group all that. You can even alpha lock this one. And check this out. If you had textures, this is what you want to do. You want to do your textures separate as like a high frequency pass. Okay. That's the difference. Because otherwise you'll blur them all out, right? So you'd have to add them back later on. And alpha lock, boom. You see? So now you can actually have everything kind of separated really neat like. And it's not really a big deal anymore. That Krita's softround isn't maybe the best in the business perhaps, but I do want to point one thing out about Krita as well. A lot of you that watch the channel, at least, you're in Blender doing all kinds of artwork over there and maybe messing around with Krita occasionally. But I want to point out that Blender, as of this month or last month, maybe, you know, they pull in about 150,000 in donations, something around there. every month, right? Krita pulls in about $3,000. They do not make hardly anything, if anything at all, on the software. So, it's extremely underfunded if you want to think of it like that. That's the salary of like one programmer, and not even including like hosting on servers and stuff. So it's very much like a bunch of volunteer work. So if you ever want to see that actually improve, you can always make contributions to it, donate to them. I'm sure they would appreciate it, so they can get more and better stuff done. Um, rather than later, right? So do donate to Krita and Blender too. Why not do it all? And so there you have it. That's the softround workaround. As far as performance issues go, unfortunately, there's a number of things you can try tweaking to get it to work. Try auto, or you can try direct 3D. Usually is faster, but OpenGL, if you're having issues, might work out okay for you. Some other things that you might consider is that, let's see, under performance, you could try tweaking some RAM settings perhaps or something like that. But the limiting frames per second can sometimes help. I don't, try a lower frames per second perhaps. Change your CPU limitations and clone limits perhaps. But instant preview, I think, is the biggest one. So use instant preview, just check it all on, and in your document, you'll find that you can turn on instant preview over here as well. And you can also, for your brushes, when you have them selected, you'll find a lot of times you can turn instant preview on for these things. It's going to wait until like the end of strokes to calculate things, or it's going to reduce quality when you're doing things like transforms. So just keep that in mind. But even with that on, it's still, it's pretty sluggish sometimes. You can see I have it on right now. It's just a little bit delayed here. But if I was to actually copy that, go to Photoshop, paste it in. Let's try that again. Let's get out of that. Okay, yeah. It's not really delayed over here, right? It's very performant. But Krita, yeah, it's definitely a little bit sluggish. Yeah, it's definitely delayed. But the instant preview helps for sure. So definitely click it on, see how it works out for you. And try to work with, lower resolution images. Try not to go too crazy with it. I really like working at super high resolutions, and Krita just doesn't like that. So it's kind of, it's one of its things, but more or less, this is the name of the game here for Krita, is that, make do with what it has for now until it gets some updates. But they definitely have a number of things they're working on as far as like bugs and whatnot are concerned, but it's still an excellent little sketcher. And it has a lot of brush settings to play around with. This is really good stuff in here, believe it or not. I like Photoshop a lot. It's like my favorite program to work in, but it still does not have the same amount of brush settings that Krita does. It has some different ones perhaps, but it doesn't have like fall off curves and things like that. So it has ability to change the transfer a little bit, but it's like the minimum. All right. And then the maximum would be up here. And so, yeah, anyways, it's just, this is actually a little bit better in some ways than Photoshop, minus the performance issues and that soft round brush thing. I would say it's definitely a solid piece of programming, and it would be nice to see it just continue to get better, So definitely want to play around with Krita and just kind of learn it maybe. It's probably one of the, I'd say Blender is a pretty well-known success story for open source. Krita, I think, can definitely be another open source success. It just needs a little bit of love and support, right? So anyways, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll check you out in the next one. All right, take care.